Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here with you. I suppose that you are not expecting from me a big speech, which obviously would be boring. So I'm just going to give you some highlights, and then I will hand over to you for your Q&A, so that we can spend some dynamic time answering to your questions. The three messages I have to convey to you are quite simple. First message is that after 5 years of growth, we see that the European automotive market is going most probably to be flat next year, which is somewhere symbolic of some kind of slowdown that we may be seeing for the future, but we need to recognize that after this cycle of 5 years growth, this is not abnormal, but that's the reality that we foresee as a stable market for 2019 against 2018. That's the point number one. Of course, we have many challenges ahead, as you know very well, starting with the CO2 objectives that we all have to prepare in 2019 to be met in 2020. As you know, we also have the Brexit challenge that we need to adapt to, whatever the outcome will be. On the second message, we have seen last year a significant change in the diesel-petrol mix of sales. We were expecting a stronger increase of sales in terms of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. What we saw actually was a very significant shift from diesel to petrol, with 6.5 points of shift from one to the other, which means that the consumers continue to buy internal combustion engine-driven cars and focusing now on petrol rather than diesel. As an unfortunate consequence, we will see most probably an increase on the CO2 emissions in 2018 because of this significant mix change that is the consequence of the decisions of the consumers. We are, of course, facing different challenges in terms of electric mobility. The first one is to make that electric mobility affordable. It is, of course, one major challenge that everybody can understand. The second one is that in the mindset of consumers, there is still a significant range anxiety related to the autonomy of electric vehicles. And the third one is, of course, the lack of visible infrastructure, which is not sending a convenience message to the consumers that would buy an electric vehicle with a limited autonomy. So we are facing those three challenges moving forward. And it's not only the challenges of the OEMs, but also the challenges of governments all across Europe that need and must invest the infrastructure, and notably the charging infrastructure for the consumers to be confident that they can easily charge their car on everyday life. The third message, of course, is that we are still looking for the outcome of Brexit. As you can see, as well as we do, things are very volatile. If we were to face a no-deal Brexit outcome, that would be, of course, dramatic for the region, and dramatic for the industry, and dramatic for the UK automobile industry. So I don't want to here describe black scenarios, but we know that a no-deal Brexit outcome will be, of course, extremely dramatic for the European automotive industry. So basically, those are the three major messages that I wanted to convey with you, and without further ado, I would like to hand over to you for the Q&A. Thank you.
So just before we open up to your questions, a quick reminder that Mr. Tavares is speaking as President of ACEA this afternoon, so we won't be taking any company-specific questions. And you are also welcome to address your questions to Mr. Jonnaert. Questions in English, please, and if you could say your media outlet and your name.
Hello, I'm Gilles from Reuters. I've got two questions. When you said that CO2 emissions are bound to go up, you said 2018, but were you talking about 2019 too? And what can be the pattern towards the targets of 2020? And the second question, when you mention all the shaky elements for the car industry, do you include what's happening to Mr. Ghosn and all the question marks surrounding the future of the number one car alliance? Thank you.
Thank you for both of your questions. On the first one, I was talking about 2018. compared to 2017. As you know, each time we have a mix of sales between petrol and diesel that goes in the direction of petrol, you have automatically and mechanically an increase on CO2 emissions, because as you know well, petrol is on average 10 to 50% higher CO2 emissions than diesel, which means that each time we are facing a diesel bashing, of course, either customers buy electric vehicles or they buy petrol vehicles. What we saw in 2018 is that the diesel-petrol mix moved towards petrol by 6.5 points more, which then means that CO2 emissions mechanically will increase in 2018 against 2017, which also means that customers are not moving from diesel directly to electric vehicles, they are moving to petrol. And that means also that the diesel electrification challenge that we have ahead of us is still a significant one. And as you know, we have discussed many times about what are the preconditions for success for the electrification of mobility. One of them being the charging infrastructure, the other one being the range anxiety, and the third one being affordability. So as long as we don't have a clear and efficient answer to consumers on affordability, range anxiety, and charging network density, then we can possibly anticipate that it's not going to fire and spark as much as we would like it to spark. So that's the situation right now. The numbers I was commenting are 2018 against 2017. Second question that you raised is a question I will not answer specifically, because as it was said, we will not answer questions about specific companies and especially the management of specific companies. So with all the respect to you, I will not answer that question. Thank you.
Any more questions?
You said I'm Erik from Le Monde Daily. You said we need visibility of infrastructure to boost the electric market, but we probably need also visibility of a lot of models, which is not the case now. If you take the bottom of the market, for the low price you have the choice between Zoe and Zoe, and for the top of the market you have the choice between Tesla and Tesla. So will the industry come with a lot of choice for consumer?
Well, it's a great point, and by the way, thank you for the question. You were saying that we needed visibility on the charging network infrastructure. You are right, but I think we could say, both of us, that customers need visibility, right? Customers, at the end of the day, they decide, except if we limit their freedom of mobility, and then the only way to be mobile is to have an electric vehicle, which is another story that we could discuss in our modern democracies. But if we stay on an open decision-making process for consumers, then the visibility of the charging network needs to be given to the consumers, not specifically to the OEMs. That's point number one. Models, you just have to read and listen to all the announcements that have been made across all the European car makers. The number of electric models that have been announced for the next years, if not for the next month, is extremely high. And I don't know any European car maker who has not announced a significant ramp-up in the electrification of its portfolio. And of course, you mentioned two of them. I could mention others. I will not, by courtesy vis-à-vis the ones I would eventually forget. So I don't want to mention the ones I have in mind, not to take the risk to forget a few others, but there are many more than the two ones that you have mentioned. So already existing today, you have more, and within the next months and years, you'll see that it's going significantly to increase, but that will not remove the three preconditions for success that I was sharing with you. One is affordability, the second one is charging network density, and the third one is range anxiety. As long as we don't fix those three things, it's going to be very difficult to see a significant increase in the sales mix of electric vehicles, which means that most probably consumers will continue to move from diesel to petrol, which most probably means that the CO2 emissions will continue to increase as a consequence. And that's why we believe that we need to tackle those three preconditions in a very dynamic and forward-looking way.
We had another question.
Carmen Finkenzeller from Germany's Business Weekly, Wirtschaftswoche. As you were mentioning, so CO2 emissions are going up, and especially in Germany, we have had these last 2 weeks enormous discussions of whether it is really scientifically based that diesel has to be condemned and that people change to petrol cars. So what is your opinion on that? Is there or can there be a way back to using diesel cars, or is this story over?
It's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I think it's a question that needs a scientific answer from one side, but also a psychological answer from the other side. As you know, there are a lot of emotions around the diesel bashing question, and the emotions in our societies have a say in the way people think. If you ask scientists what is at Euro 6 level the differences between emissions in terms of NOx, particles and CO2 on petrol and on diesel, you just have to look at the regulations and looking at the limits on those three pollutants for the two kinds of powers, you will see that the gaps are very limited. You'll see that there is not such a big difference between the two. So then, if you look at it from a pure scientific perspective, and if you are sincere about reducing the CO2 emissions, you don't understand why we are pushing away a technology that is affordable for the consumers, efficient from a CO2 perspective, and finally, not very different from petrol. That's, I would say, the rationale, the logical rationale that both you and me could discuss. And we don't have to have an opinion, you just have to look at the regulations, and the regulations will give you the answer on the numbers that you need to meet on those three different pollutants. So that's the logical, rational way of thinking. What we also have to acknowledge is today, because of the particles in the urban areas, there is an emotional part of this problem that we cannot disregard. And taking that into consideration, we believe that we need to make sure that our consumers are going to be the ones that make the final decision. So we cannot disregard the fact that the final consumer decides, and he decides based on facts, based on emotions, based on the information that they get from other sources than the OEMs. As you know, the OEMs are not considered today as being extremely credible in this type of areas. And perhaps it's a pity for the citizens, because in most of our companies we have north of 15,000 engineers per car company, which represents a very big scientific powerhouse, which is available for the societies in which you operate. But obviously, currently the society has decided not to use this scientific power to make itself an opinion about the problem, which is a fact. We may think it's not the most efficient way, but it's a fact. So I think, yes, there are countries in Europe, and you mentioned Germany as one, but most probably not the only one, where people start to understand that at the end of the day, it's not only a problem about CO2, it's not only the problem of global warming, it's a problem of different kinds of pollutants, and how do you control and how you reduce the different levels of pollutants is something that needs to be looked at in a wider way than just making the diesel bashing. And I think that's something that we can observe, both of us. I think it's not over. I think things will continue to evolve, and they will also evolve based on the consequences of the decisions that have been made, and eventually based on consequences on freedom of mobility from one side, on jobs from the other side, on technology from the third side.
So you see a future for the diesel, or is it sort of?
We don't have to see a future for the diesel. I think we just have to make customers happy. Customers decide. And as you know well, our industry is not considered to be credible in terms of giving a recommendation on that matter, and we respect that. We may not be happy with it, but we respect. So if we are not credible in terms of giving a technological recommendation, because of many things that, of course, you know better than I do, then we don't have to have an opinion. We just have to adapt to what the customer is expecting from us, and we just have to be agile enough to adapt fast enough to be in sync with the consumer. Now, the question you raise is the society giving the consumers the appropriate information and the right level of integrity on the data that we give the consumer to make himself a decision or herself a decision? That's another discussion that we could have. But on this matter, I don't think that our industry is recommending one technology more than the other one. We are not there. That's not our position. We just say, for the CO2, diesel is a very good technology because it's low cost, so you can implement in a large number of cars and have a huge impact on the units in operation, and it's affordable. So it's efficient on CO2 and it's affordable. But some other people will say, yes, but there are particles, and even with the filters it's not enough, blah, blah, blah. Fine, that we can hear that. But we have other technologies, and all of the European car makers are investing heavily. Some of them are betting the house on electrification, which means that if it doesn't happen properly in the future, with the right level of autonomy, the right level of cost, the right level of charging network, not knowing today where the taxes on petrol and diesel are going to end up, then we may have a problem in a few years. And that's something that I have already explained many times, so I don't think I should come back to that point today.
If I perhaps may, to reinforce what Mr. Tavares just said, in Germany, the German Automobile Club, ADAC, did an independent assessment of the latest Euro 6D vehicles, diesel vehicles.
Yeah, the ACEA is not very credible either.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
But at least they made an assessment and they come to the conclusion that the latest diesel vehicles are meeting all the concerns and addressing now all the concerns which existed before when it comes to NOx or particles.
So that gives me the opportunity, with all the respect, to ask you a question. Please don't answer, because you are supposed to make the questions, I'm supposed to make the answers. But because this is a very interesting discussion, we can discuss another day on a one-on-one, is, from your perspective, who is credible to give the appropriate recommendation to a consumer in Europe today?
That's a very good question.
That's a good question, right? So let's keep it for the dinner. Thank you.
It's a philosophical question.
Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you. Other points?
I was wondering if you could be more specific on the Brexit impacts, especially on the question of jobs. And in France, for example, if you have maybe some more detailed information regarding all this, because indeed the question of no deal is getting more and more accurate every day. So can you give us some more information on this?
I'm afraid, unfortunately, I can't. Unfortunately, I'm looking at the same news as you are. I'm reading that more and more people operating in the UK are taking decisions or not making decisions to prepare for a negative outcome of the current negotiations. So we can all feel that something is preparing for the worst, and that's not good. You know, I think that European citizens need free trade. They need open market conditions to benefit from what we have best, which is our capability to innovate, our capability to bring more freedom of mobility with more safety, more comfort, more entertainment, less emissions for a lower price. That's what they can benefit from us. And of course, if we create additional frictions and additional costs, all of those additional frictions and costs will not go to the benefit of the final consumer. So unfortunately, I cannot give you more information than this. We all see that from the European automotive industry perspective, a no deal for the Brexit outcome will be a disaster. And we all see today that there are clear background signs given by the companies showing that everybody is preparing for a negative outcome. So this is to say that our position at ACEA is to urge the European Union from one side and the UK government from the other side to reach an agreement. That is exactly what we are requesting. By the way, we are trying not to add more tension and anxiety to a situation which is already extremely tense and very, very sad for everybody. Talking to continental Europeans or to my British friends, everybody is so sad. So the point is, we are not going to add more anxiety and more tension to what is already extremely tense. We just see, like you are, that people are preparing for that outcome, and that means that after an eventual poor outcome of those discussions, many bad things could happen. I sincerely wish, as the head of ACEA, as the head of PSA, as a European citizen, that this will not happen. And specifically for the next generation of European, I don't think that this makes any sense. I would like that we protect the next generation of Europeans by not going to this negative outcome.
Do we have any further questions from the floor?
Maybe one.
Okay, let's go first.
Daniel Aronson, AFP. I have one question regarding a worst case scenario in case of a hard Brexit, and maybe if everything is going wrong. What is your worst case scenario of growth for the European market in 2019? I understand the upside is 1%. I missed the downside.
Well, the downside is going to be not only dependent, of course, on the Brexit, because if Brexit no deal happens and the sterling collapses, most probably many car makers will have to increase their pricing to protect their margins. As a consequence, most probably the UK market will collapse because of a significant price increase to compensate for the sterling devaluation. That's on the UK side. On the continental side, most probably there is another outcome, which is related to how the car companies are going to prepare for the CO2 targets in 2020. And as you know, the CO2 targets in 2020 are to be met on registrations. And if you look at the amount of inventories that the car companies have by the end of each fiscal year, it means that when you end the year of 2019, the CO2 performance of your inventory by the end of 2019 needs to be consistent with the objective that you have to meet in 2020 on registrations. What does that mean? It means that the way you are going to manage your production plan in 2019, and specifically on the second half of 2019, is going to be fully impacted by what you need to achieve in 2020. That may have an impact on the market in the second half of 2019. And today it's very difficult to forecast. That's why we believe that we should stay very cautious on this matter. And possibly you have different strategies from different car companies based on their portfolio, based on the technologies that they already master or they are intending to launch this year. So we believe 2019 is going to be very volatile, possibly flat overall, but with very significant differences across the board, depending on the strategies of different car companies. I believe there will be a significant diversity of strategies moving forward. So I don't know what is the black scenario.
You're not ruling out a decline of the car market.
See, when we say the market will be stable, it means that it's going to be around that position, but of course it may variate a few points around that position.
If there are no further questions, no last one, we have a couple of minutes if there is. If not, I think we can wrap it up there.
Okay, so let's conclude. First of all, I would like to thank you for your interest in the European automotive industry. You know that this industry over the last century has delivered enormous wealth for the societies in which we operate. You know that for the last century we have significantly increased comfort, safety, entertainment, and reduced emissions in our products. You know that automobiles are a mobility device. It's a device that protects the freedom of mobility. You know that freedom of mobility is core to the modern democracies. So we believe at the ACEA that we are going to be able to ensure clean, safe, and affordable mobility. We just want to make sure that we can find our way and find our path towards that goal, because we want to continue to contribute to the societies in which you operate, not only by delivering those mobility devices that ensure freedom of mobility, which again, I repeat, is core for the modern democracies, but we also want to have some breathing space to find the best way in a competitive way so that the European consumer can have the best of the contributions of our car companies. This is our mindset. We are prepared for this period, which is going to be most probably quite chaotic. We think we have the technologies, we think we have the engineers, we think we have the brands, we think we have the management teams. We just want to operate in the smoothest possible way. So any chaotic context that would could be created around the automotive industry in Europe is not helpful, but we are ready to support as long as we have a clear framework in which we can operate. Thank you very much for your interest and your attention. Thank you.